we are here to do the New York Notable List. I'm really excited to talk about these books because I was excited to know what the books were, excited to talk about the books that I have read, talk about the books that I haven't read, talk about the books that I probably will never read, or the books that I'm really excited to read now. I did have a few surprises when I read this, and I would love to know your little tally on how many books you have read during this list. It is not very high for me because I don't read all of the books that come out in 2023, and I also don't read primarily literary fiction, which is a lot of this. And I read a fair amount of nonfiction, but this is not the kind of nonfiction I normally read. So we will go through and we will talk about it and it'll be fun. The first one is After Sappho, and this is a book that I have planned to read. I think it's really interesting. It was longlisted for the Booker last year, and it melds both nonfiction and fiction into the thing. It's called like a nonfiction novel, which I think is really fascinating. It is looking at a bunch of women from the early 19th century, like Virginia Woolf, and how they intersect. The second book is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Crosby, and this is the same author as Razorblade Cheers. I don't read a lot of thrillers, and this is apparently very bloody and stuff. I could see a world in which I read this one day, but I don't really think that I'm going to love it in the future or read it probably. The third book is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. I have been kind of courted over to thinking that I'm going to read this book because it is a family saga and it is all about these different points of views and stuff. I was at first a little hesitant, but the more good reviews that I've heard around the Booker and stuff like that of this year, I've been more thinking that I am going to read it. The fourth book is Biography of X, and this is about one woman who interacts with various people throughout the different eras, and she is also a very controversial figure, and I think that that's going to be really interesting. I do have it on my launder list of TBR, so I may never get to it, but I am interested in reading it. Number 5 is Birnam Wood by Eleanor Catton. If it ever becomes an audiobook, I'm quite likely to read it. I went through all the way through the Giller, and there has been no audiobook of this book, and I looked at the like 600 pages of it and said, nope, not doing that. The sixth book is Blackouts by Justin Torres. This just won the National Book Award in the United States, and I think that's really fascinating. It used erasure and stuff like that. I am actually really interested in reading a poetry collection that does this called The Ferguson Report Erasure by Nicole Seeley. I heard her speak in an interview with Jen Campbell, and I was like, oh my goodness, this sounds fantastic. So I don't not think that Blackouts is fascinating, but I feel like I would more likely gear toward poetry in this way than I would in a novel. Number 7 is Bright Young Women, and this deals with the women that were killed by a serial killer. And I'm just, nope. I do not do true crime. I don't do thriller in this way. I have a hard time believing that it's not going to glorize true crime. And even if it's not, I don't want to fill my head with crime stuff. I do love the occasional mystery. I love the good old fashionedness of it. I had one of my professors in university say that as a counselor, you can never really want to engage in true crime because you deal with people's problems firsthand every day, and like coding yourself in that is so difficult. And I'm not working as a counselor, but I work in the mental health field, and I think that I don't know, there's so many things happening that I don't want to lean into a world that glorifies and uses that entertainment. I do love books that look at tragedy and look at sadness in a non-glamorizing way, and I am accusing the author, I guess, a little bit here, but I'm just accusing the entire genre. I just don't like it very much. Number 8 is Chain Gang All-Stars. This is a book that I started and I just really didn't like. It has a little bit more of sci-fi, and it's looking at a world in which prisoners are kind of combined with the Colosseum, they can fight for their freedom. And it was just a writing style I really didn't like. It jumped right into it and then was just very bloody and very, not even bloody because I don't mind blood and gore. It was just more chaotic and action-packed, and whenever someone describes something as action-packed, I go, no. I love fantasy and I love sci-fi. I like slow, more thoughtful, more character building, and I read about an hour of this and I just was still not feeling anything, and I was like, I don't feel like this is a writer who's writing in the way that I would enjoy. Covenant of Water is a book that I have considered reading, but it is very long. It is 31 hours on audiobook, and I thought if it was shorter, I would be interested. Number 10 is Crook Manifesto, and this is the second book in Colson Whitehead's more crime thrillery set in Harlem. The first one was Harlem Shuffle. I am interested in reading Colson Whitehead. I would read The Underground Railroad, and I would read his other book, but I don't think that I would necessarily read this. Again, you know, crime books are not necessarily my thing. The 11th book is The Deluge, and this deals with climate change, and it deals with various other things happening in the world. Number 12 is Eastbound, and it is translated, and it is about a train, and it is a thriller. Again, thrillers aren't really my thing. I want to give a little bit of a gripe here, because I feel so often fantasy and sci-fi and other books like that are not given their due, and yet thrillers are. And I just don't think that one is more genre fiction than another. But you won't see really you'll see like I think 2 real fantasies on this entire list, but you'll see like a ton of thrillers, and it really bothers me that thrillers are considered by people who like stick up their nose at fantasy like real fiction because it's like gritty and stuff. Anyways, little rant aside, but yes, if it's a thriller, I'm probably not gonna be interested in it unless it's like Agatha Christie. Like I love the old-fashioned things, but I don't even like the Sherlock Holmes books very much. I'm just like, eh. So yeah, Agatha Christie is really the only author that I read that writes mysteries that I've really enjoyed. The next book is one of the ones that is fantasy, and it's called Emily Wilde's A Cyclopedia for Fairies, and I am interested in this, and I've been like thinking about it on and off, but then I did actually put it in on the library when I was going through the collection, so I'm really excited to read this book, hopefully in 2024. The 14th book is the first one that I really go, yes, I really want to read this, because this is called Enter Ghost. This is about a British Palestinian woman who goes back to her own like hometown in Israel, and then during the war-torn, during everything, they are putting on a Hamlet play, and during this she enters into the play. So I love Hamlet, I love Shakespeare, this is wonderful, but then also through this she becomes more politically aware and actually starts like learning about advocacy and advocating, and everything in that sounds amazing. The 15th book is a book that I read. This is A Forbidden Notebook by Elba de Cespedes. I need to learn how to say her name because of the fact that I love this book so much. This is a classic book from 1952 that was newly translated from the Italian. It was really championed by Giunta Lahiri, the Queen, who loves Italy and loves Italian literature. And I'm really excited that the book got like nominated and looked at and seen because I think that it is so incredible. I love like, you know, books about women and looking at women, and the fact that this was published in 1952 and really looks at this woman who is 43 years old. She has grown children. She married when she was 20. She's from a family that used to be genteel, that used to be very rich, but because of the wars and because of many other things, they have lost their prestige, and she has spent her entire married life in this very small apartment with her 2 children, and her daughter lives in the living room because there's not room. And she takes this notebook and she starts to write in it because she really wants to have her own thoughts. And then she's almost like questioning and stuff because she's thinking about like, should I really be focusing on these thoughts? I really don't know. And she almost feels guilty for having thoughts, but she's also hiding them in various places in the house because she realizes that she doesn't want to share these feelings. And it's about a woman's autonomy and a woman's experience, and there's so many like really like gut-wrenching scenes between her and her daughter, who's aged 20, and they don't understand each other and they're fighting, and it feels like a story that you could have taken place now. The next book is The Fraud by Zadie Smith, and this is a book that I've also read, and I did not enjoy it. It is about the Tichborne case, a case in which a man from Australia who was a farmer claimed to be the claimant of this earldom, and it had this whole thing, but it also talks about this very man who thought that he was a great writer in the age. He wrote a lot of historical fiction. I'm forgetting his real name, and he was and kind of infamous writer at the time because he wrote a lot of books, but he did not write good books, but he was contemporary to Charles Dickens, and we follow his cousin, who also is his housekeeper, and she's interacting with all of these literary people. They are coming, they are going. It has so many moving parts and so many different stories because we really only learn about like slavery from this guy who was the butler of the claimant, and he is claiming that he does know him, and then he talks about his like experience living in Jamaica and like the rebellion there and stuff like that. And it is a book that I feel like the individual parts are not bad. The story just feels very hard to follow, and I was just bored. Like, I read it in one sitting because I knew that I wanted to finish it, but I also did not want to carry this book on because I was just so not interested in reading the book. I read it back in September, and I remember very little things about the things that happened in this book. I do want to read more Zadie Smith because this was my first Zadie Smith, and it did not impress me. So hopefully I will read another Zadie Smith and I will enjoy it more. The next book is a poetry collection, and I love poetry, so I'm really excited for this. It's called From by Monica Yoon, and it is really looking at racism and the conversation and alienation of the other over and over again and what it feels like to be the other, and I think that that's going to be wonderful. The next book is A Guest in the House, and this is a graphic novel that is a little bit take on Rebecca or other stories like that, in which we have like this gothic thing. A younger woman marries an older man, and then there's a ghost of his wife. I think that there's a little bit of romance between the ghost wife and the young woman, because I think that she kind of quickly married to cover up her sexuality, I think is kind of one of the things that I've heard about this novel. The 19th book is The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store, and this is by James McBride. He is an acclaimed author throughout the things. He really talks about immigration and about Black and Jewish people in the 1970s, the 1920s, 1930s. It's very like sprawling and stuff. I feel like I could be interested, but for some reason, all of the different James McBride books, I've looked at their covers, I looked at their descriptions, and I've kind of felt confused and gone, I don't know, something feels like I should like this, but I'm not drawn in. So if you like James McBride, I would really love to hear it, because I just look at his books and I don't know why, but I feel just uninterested, even though I feel like I should. Number 20 is Hello Beautiful by Anne Napolino, and I am so excited for this. I really, really love her book, Dear Edward. It is up there. It is a book that I have cried and thought about and like recommended to the sun and back. I just really, really enjoy this book and I really love it. And this is a kind of re-inspired version of the March Sisters for Little Women, and I think that it's gonna be really lovely, and I meant to read it this year and I haven't. Number 21 is History of Burning, and this is by a Canadian author. It looks at an Indian family that was born in Uganda, and then I think that they go to the Caribbean and they go to Canada, and it's about immigration, and I think the experience of Indian people in Uganda and in Africa is something that is just like really not talked about, and I think that that is going to be really interesting. I was really hoping this book was going to be shortlisted for the Booker this year, and then when it wasn't, it's kind of fallen off my TBR, but I do hope to read it sometime soon. Number 22 is Holly by Stephen King. I really like some Stephen King books. I think I've read like 6 of his books, but I've not really read many of his modern books, and I'm not really interested in Holly. I have enjoyed his books from the earlier years, and I only read his books on audio because I don't think I can sit with his horror, but I can enjoy the craft and like listening to him write. Number 23 is A House for Alice, and this is by Diana Evans, and it's a Nigerian family saga, and after someone dies there's like a re-examination of history and a family and all those things, which sounds super fascinating. Number 24 is The Iliad by Emily Wilson. This is a retranslation of the Homer tale. I have the Iliad somewhere here. I hope to read it at some point. I would love to read this version if it's like fascinating. I don't really know what is really different about this, if she found like new things out of it or it's just a fresh, fun retranslation. I don't know, but it sounds exciting. Number 23 is Ink Blood Sister Scribe, and this is the second fantasy book on it. It is about magical books, and they are geared to protect magical books, and then because they protect this, they get magical powers. This is a book that like, it sounds interesting enough, but it's probably not a book that I will like run out to see. If you love it, I would love to hear it because I could definitely be convinced. Number 26 is Kairos, and this is about a years-long relationship with an older married man and a younger woman, and for some reason this is like crack to me. It always allows some discussion of women's role and power and influence and all of those things that I really love. This is translated from the German. My library does not have it, but otherwise I would be interested in it. Kentika by Elizabeth Graber is kind of based on the story of her great-grandmother. It looks at her like migration from Barcelona to Havana to Queens. She is a Jewish woman, and it's like looking at that migration throughout the 20th century. It definitely sounds fascinating. Probably not fascinating enough for me to pick up, but it's still fascinating. Number 28 is Land of Milk and Honey by C. Pam Zhang. This is a book that I probably should have looked up the description for because I have no interest in reading it, and you might have an interest in reading it. I read her first novel and I just really didn't like it. I didn't like the reading experience. I was bored. I was also just not interested. I didn't like the writing style. I don't know. It was one of those books like I slogged through, and then at the end I was like, why did I slog through? Number 29 is Lone Woman by Victor Laval. This is set in 1915 and it is a horror book. It is Western. I have been on the fence about whether I want to read this off and on. I've heard good reviews. I've heard bad reviews. I sometimes like horror. I tend to go into more classic horror. I don't know. Number 30 is called Monica, and this is a graphic novel. It is about a young boy who was abandoned, and then there's calamities, and then he finally reconnects with his parents. I did in fact write out 100 books, which was a decision, but you can tell that I like a book when I wrote a lot of description. 31 is The Most Secret Mystery of Men, and this is a translated book. It's coming of age, and it is about a young writer who is Congolese, and he is accused of plagiarism, and it's about like how American literature really imposes itself on African literature, and I feel like that is so fascinating. I would love to read it. The New Normals by Gabrielle Bunk is about a young Black couple. They have just had a child and their child died, and now they decide to start a utopian society, and yet utopian societies never work out. We always think they're going to work out, and then, you know, other things come in. This is a book I probably won't read. I like dystopians, but not necessarily in this style. Number 33 is The Northwoods by Daniel Mason, and I'm really excited for this. This is on my December TBR, and this is about one house throughout centuries, all the way from colonial times in which someone is campaigning to abolish slavery all the way until present day. And I'm really excited. I love the fact that it's just going to be fixated on this one house and other people will come and go, but the house will remain. I think that's really fascinating. Number 34 is Not Even the Dead, and this is translated from the Spanish. It is about 16th century Mexico, and it is about an ex-soldier who is charged with hunting down indigenous prophet. And that just, I don't know, I'm sure that they could do it wonderful. It just feels like there's just ripe for missed opportunity there. But number 35 sounds incredibly fascinating, and it is The Nursery by Silvana Mollar. And the beginning of the book says, I used to be a translator, but now I'm a milk bar. And it is about a young mother who is in this one apartment with 4 walls, and she's slowly going crazy. And I love a good unhinged woman story, and I think this will be wonderful. Number 36 is Our Share of the Night by Mariana Enriquez. I have read her previous one, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, and I did not love it, and it was short stories. It is a book that I enjoyed some parts of it, but it just felt gratuitous for gratuitous sake, and it was very violent and just very sexual in places where I was like, it doesn't feel like this is adding to the plot. And I know that's part of horror, it's just not the kind of horror that I love. So this is definitely not going to be reading like an 800-page book about this. Number 37 is The Pineapple Street, and this is by Jenny Jackson, and it is about an upper-class Brooklyn family, and they are messy. And I love a good messiness. I don't know if I will run out and read this book, but I'm definitely interested. Number 38 is The Reformatory, and this is a horror book about a young black boy who is sentenced to a reformatory school, and it deals with racism, and I feel like it would be really interested. I feel like it sounds like I don't like long books, but I feel like unless I'm like completely sold with a book, I'm not likely to read a long book, and this is 21 hours. I do read a lot of audiobooks, so that kind of makes me less intensely interested. Number 39 is The Saint of the Bright Doors, and I wasn't initially interested in this. This is another fantasy, which I love fantasy, but it is about a man who is trained as an assassin, and he runs away from his destiny, and then he goes and ends up in this politically volatile metropolis, which that part was what sold me. I love politics, I love like maneuvering all of the things, and the fact that it used the word metropolis, and I was like, okay, this feels interesting. So I might pick it up. I did put it on loan at the library. Number 40 is Same Bed, Different Dreams, and this is by Ed Park, and this is an alternative history of Korea. I feel like I could be interested in this book, but it did not really speak to me in any great way. Number 41 is Take What You Need, and this is about a young woman and her former stepmother and dynamics, and that sounds incredibly fascinating. I love complicated dynamics in families and former families and between women, and I feel like that will be really good. Number 42 is The Other Eden by Paul Harding. This is about a small island off Maine, and it is a fictionalized account of these people that were forcibly removed. They were interracial, and they had been breeding within their own same thing, and it's all about like, you know, the ways in which the government intervenes with communities and like says what is right and what is wrong. I have definitely felt icky about this book. I've expressed that on many occasions. I have like thought that maybe I should read it to not be just so prejudiced against it. I don't know. Number 43 is Tom Lake by Anne Pratchett. This is a family saga, and it is about a play. The mother of the family, the matriarch of the family, was a former actress, and she loves reciting this play, and they love hearing her stories, and I find it really, really fascinating. I've never read Anne Pratchett, and I feel like this would be an interesting tale. Number 44 is The Unsettled. This is about 3 generations of women throughout various different places in the United States in time and space. Number 45 is Victory City by Salman Rushdie. I plan on reading Midnight Children, and depending on whether I like that or not, depends on whether I will continue with his fiction or not. Number 45 is We Could Have Been So Good, and this is a queer book that is a romance set in the mid-century about 2 reporters. Western Lane by Chetna Maru. This is another book that was shortlisted for the Booker. I'm intensely interested in it. I've been waiting on a loan for a very long time. I find the summary so compelling because it is about an 11-year-old girl and her sisters, and her mother has died, and her father trains all of his grief and all of his things into really teaching them to be very competitive in squash. Number 48 is Witness by Jamal Binkley, and this is short stories. I love short stories. It is set in Brooklyn, and it means and kind of deals with the idea of what does it mean to be seen and to see others. Number 49 is Y/N, and is by Esther Yee, and is about like, it discusses kind of like obsession and idols. It's really discussing like fan fiction, because that is like when it's like your name and she becomes obsessed with this like specific idol, and it leads to dark and twisted things. I've definitely been interested in it and have been waiting for my library to get it. And number 50 is a book that I have read and really, really loved, and this is Yellowface by Rebecca Kwan. I think that she is such a masterful novelist. She really discusses themes and racism, and she takes this on by kind of putting us in the point of view of a white woman who has always been a little bit jealous of her Asian classmate who has always gotten a little bit more. They were both like writers and they met in college doing writing, and her friend had this massive advance and became very popular and she did not. And then when her friend dies when she is present, she steals her novel and she really whitewashes it, and then also takes like photography and stuff like that, making her look a little more Asian and changing her name because she's a brunette and can pass. And it's just such an interesting and like a revolting book because you're in the point of view and you start to like sympathize, and then she does something and it's written in that way that's just like justifying, and it is such an intensely good book. The first of the nonfiction books is called The 272, and it's a really complex story of Catholicism in the 19th century and how a bunch of enslaved people were sold to save Georgetown University. Number 52 is called Anansi's Gold, and it is a true crime book, so it's the Battle of Ink and Ice, and it is about Arctic exploration, not interested. Number 54 is The Best Minds, and it is about a Yale student whose friend kills his girlfriend, again true crime, not interested. Number 55 is Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs, it is about the deep state, not interested. Built from the Fire is about a 1921 race massacre in which a bunch of Black people were killed, and it feels like an incredibly hard book but an incredibly necessary book as well. Number 57 is called Cobalt Red, and it is about the tech industry crossing, and it is about both like boundaries and highways as well as how that intersects with race. And I think that that is a fascinating discussion and like things paired together. I probably would not pick it up myself, but I would definitely think that it would be a good book to exist. 59 is the first book that like incredibly intrigues me, and this is called Daughter of the Dragon, and it is about an Asian American like actress who was first popular during the time of the 1920s during the silent films, and then she goes into talkies and television, and that sounds so fascinating. I love like discussing race and things like that through specific people and the way that their stories can tell things. Number 60 is Doppelganger, and this is about a woman who looks and has the same name as a woman who is very reactionary, and her life like that, it does not appeal to me at all. Easily Slipped into Another World is a biography of a jazz musician, which just sounds really fascinating, and I would really love to read that sometime. Number 62 is The Exceptions, and this is about the lack of women in STEM. Number 63 is The Fire Weather, and this is about the 2016 McMurray fire in Alberta. And I just remember being Canadian and experiencing this, and I don't think that I want to read a book about it. Number 64 is The Great Escape, and it's about a labor organizing who finds out that people are imprisoned in Mississippi and finds out a way to get them out. Number 65 is The Half-Known Life, and it is about philosophy. And I definitely enjoy philosophy, but I don't enjoy necessarily books about philosophy. 66 though is How to Say Babylon, and this is by Sophia St. Clair, and I've been interested in her poetry collection, The Cannibal, for a really, really long time, and she is at one point considered like the rising star of the Jamaican poetry thing, and her family all wants her to be perfect, and it's really just a biography, and she reads it herself, and I'm so excited to get my hands on this book, and hopefully Cannibal, which is not very readily available here. Humanly Possible is a book by Sarah Bakewell, and it is another philosophy book that looks at humanism thoughts throughout the centuries. Judgment at Tokyo is a book about the war crimes and the prosecution of that of the Japanese people after World War II, and how this shaped the region and how this shaped the Cold War. That sounds so fascinating. I like immediately went to go find it, and it was 31 hours on audio. And I'm like, I could read like many books, or I could read that. And I'm like, I feel like I just might read this not in this book, but like, I don't know. I want like a summary of this book. Number 69 is King, and this is a biography of Martin Luther King. I don't often read like singular biographies. I prefer like memoirs or like a little more eventful. Like the really large overarching biographies are not always what I go for. Number 70 just sounds like a book that I just don't want to go near. It's called The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, and this is how American Christians have been separated by the Trump movement. And as someone who is a Christian, who is a left-wing Christian, and has had to see the way in which this has become a debate in my faith, which I just find incredibly painful, I would not want to read this book. The Land of Hope and Fear, and this is looking about the different faith communities in Israel and how they intersect between the various different faiths and communities. Liliana's Invincible Summer, and this is by an author who has actually written a lot. She's an older woman now, and she writes about her younger sister disappearing in the summer of 1990. And it really looks at the ways in which Mexican women are not viewed as people and how femicide happens. And she has another book that is called Grieving Dispatches from a Wounded Country. So I actually really want to read more of her work in the future. Number 74 is Lives of the Wives, and this is a biography of 5 literary marriages from Roald Dahl and his wife Patricia Neal, and she was a superstar actress that he was very jealous of Radcliffe Hall and her lover, in which that was a very interesting and snobby relationship, and it's looking at the various different things. I don't know, I feel like I could read this book, but I could not read this book. I don't know. Number 75 is A Living Remedy by Nicole Chun. I have previously read her book All You Can Ever Know, which was about her transracial adoption into a white family as a Korean American. I found it a really fascinating and really hard memoir as someone who has several friends who are Asian who were adopted into white families, and I've walked through kind of the ways in which they've always felt like not white enough and then not Asian enough, and like how they're alienated from their culture but then also always subjected to be included in their culture, and it's just like that very confusing thing. A Living Remedy really looks at the failures of American healthcare and how both her parents died because of lack of healthcare, and also she was unable to see them because of COVID, and all the various different things and heartache around that. I feel like it will be a really hard book to read, and I would like to read it someday because I like her as an author. Number 76 is Master Slave Husband Wife. This was a story that I was already familiar with from history, and it is about a married couple that were enslaved. The woman could pass for white, so she dressed up as a man and she put herself in a sling so it looked like she was illiterate, but then they would not ask her to write, and her husband masqueraded as her male slave and they escaped to freedom through that way. And I feel like this will be just such an amazing biography that I would really love to read. Number 77 is Monsters, and this is how to reconcile the misdeeds of creatives with the art you love. And I know it looks back to people like Polanski, but it also looks at J.K. Rowling. And I just feel like this might also be a little bit hard of a book. I feel like I definitely have had these things, but I definitely question including someone like Polanski who raped a 13-year-old and left the country and still receives Oscars and stuff like that. That just is just one of the things that I can't think about without turning my insides out. Number 78 is My Name is Barbara, and this is a memoir of Barbara Streisand's life. Number 79 is The Odyssey of Phyllis Wheatley, and I am so excited to get my hands on this someday because she is the first Black woman who was ever published in the United States. I think she was actually published in the UK because they wouldn't publish her, but she was a house slave during this era. Her owners educated her, and then she wrote poetry and was published, and a lot of people thought she was not intelligent enough to write her poetry, so she had to go like under trial and stuff like that. She's such an interesting life, and I would love to read more about her. Number 80 is called Ordinary Notes, and this is exactly my kind of book. It's about 248 random notes and insights and art from Black people across America, and it's just ordinary things, and I find that kind of history so interesting. Number 81 is Oscar Wars. This is about various winners and triumphs and upsets in the Oscar world, and I'm not very interested. That's fine. Number 82 is Our Migrant Souls, and it's about the Latino American experience and dispelling stereotypes and just like looking at various things within that community, and I feel like that would be really interesting. Number 83 is Page Boy by Elliot Page. This is a memoir of his experience throughout his life and being an actor and the ways in which those things have intersected with his sexuality and gender. Number 84 is Poverty by America, and this is by the same author of Evicted. I am definitely interested in these books, but because they are so central on American and Canada and America are very different, I often feel quite like alienated by these books because like so many things are different. Poverty and disenfranchisement and eviction are things that like follow across borderlines, but the ways in which they are manifested are so different that it feels almost confusing to read them from there. Number 86 is The Rigor of Angels, and this is another philosophy book. Number 87, I'm not sure if I'm going to say his name correctly, but he is De Winberg, and he is a classical musician and composer and one of the most challenging ones, and there is biography about him. Number 88 is Sink, and this is a memoir about a difficult childhood. Always love that. Number 89 is The Slip, and this is an art history biography about various people. I was so sad when my library did not have this. I think that I really love collective biographies and I really love art. I have no artistic skills, but I do have an Instagram in which I talk about art because I really love looking at art. I have now learned that even though I will never be able to draw, I can really admire and look and ponder other people's art. Number 90 is Some People Need Killing, and this is about extrajudicial killing in the Philippines during the last president's life, and he just killed a lot of people for random things in really terrible ways. Number 91 is Spoken Word, and this is by Joshua Bennett, and this is a history of spoken word. It's something that I really love. I love poetry, I love all of those things, so I think it would be such a fascinating book to read. Number 92 is A Threat of Violence, and this is about true crime in Ireland. Still not interested. Why do they love true crime so much? There's like several fantastic like nonfiction books that I could recommend that are not true crime, but like I feel like half of this list is true crime. Number 93 is super interesting though, because it's called Time's Echo, and it's looking at the cultural history of music and the Holocaust and World War II. It also looks at that man who's very difficult to pronounce earlier, and like different like composers and writers in that era, and how like memory is through music. I think that's also super fascinating. Number 94 is The Undertow, and this is a book about a man trying to gently and with compassionate talk to the alt-right and various conspiracy groups. Number 95 is The Unscripted, and this is about the CEO of Paramount and all of his corruption. Number 96 is Up Home, and this is by Ruth J. Simmons, and it is about Jim Crow, Texas, and she's the youngest of 12 children, and she goes on to become the president of Smith and Brown University. Number 97 is The Wager, and this is about a 1742 shipwreck and various accounts and how everyone said different things and they're trying to like piece it all together. Number 98 is Waiting to be Arrested at Night, and this is about China and the persecution of like Muslim minority there, and it is about someone's real life and their experience, and it is translated into English. Number 98 is What an Owl Knows, and this is about birds, various birds, all of the birds. Number 99 is Wifedom, and this is about Orwell's first wife and how even though he is not always great to women, he even admitted that he was not a very good husband. I am like maybe interested in reading this, I don't know. I sometimes struggle with biographies, as I said. Number 100 is You Have to Be Prepared to Die Before You Can Live, and this is about Birmingham in the 1960s and the civil rights and peaceful protests. This is a part of history that I'm really interested in, and I would love to read this someday. So let me know which books you were really surprised were on here, which books you had not heard about. I not heard about a good chunk of these, especially the nonfiction books, even though I do read nonfiction a fair amount. I would love to hear what books that I discarded that you think are wonderful, what books that I said were wonderful that maybe you would caution against. I would love to know if you added anything to your TBR. I definitely have added things to my TBR that I'm really excited for, and I will see you next time.